Good morning and welcome to the National Security Space Association's SpaceTime interview series. My name is Chris Williams and I'm pleased to serve as chair of the recently renamed Moorman Center for Space Studies. As many of you know, General Tom Moorman was a giant in the field of national security space, and we at the association are deeply honored to uphold his name and legacy. Today, we are very pleased to welcome our distinguished speaker, Lieutenant General John E. Shaw. Lieutenant General Shaw is the Deputy Commander of U.S. Space Command. U.S. Space Command is the 11th and most recently established unified combatant command responsible for conducting operations in, from, and to space to deter conflict and, if necessary, defeat aggression, deliver space combat power for the joint combined force, and defend vital U.S. interests with allies and partners. Sir, thanks for joining us today. Lieutenant General Shaw is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. Prior to his current position, he was dual-hatted as Commander, Combined Forces Space Component Command, U.S. Space Command, and Deputy Commander, Space Operations Command, U.S. Space Force, out at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. He also served as the Deputy Commander of Air Force Space Command, United States Air Force, among many other important positions. A brief note about our format today. Today's SpaceTime event will last 60 minutes. Lieutenant General Shaw will provide some opening comments and afterwards take some questions. I'll pose a few questions, but we also welcome questions from our audience. If you have a question for General Shaw, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I can't promise we'll get through all of your questions, but we'll certainly do our best. Without further ado, on behalf of the National Security Space Association, sir, we thank you for your dedicated service to our great nation and your willingness to speak with us today. Lieutenant General Shaw, the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and hey, good morning to everybody. And thanks, hey, Chris, thanks for the introduction, but also thanks to you for your long service to our country as well in the various capacities that you've served. So it's an honor to serve with you. And I also want to say thanks so much to NSSA for their effort to remember General Moorman, who we lost recently. When I look back at my own career, I was a young company grade officer when I first met General Moorman. He is and always will be a senior statesman when it comes to space power, and we miss him. So thanks for what NSSA is doing to remember him. I thought I would start by saying, as the Deputy Commander of U.S. Space Command, let me describe the situation that we're seeing right now. It's a time of intense competition. We're seeing something dramatic almost every day. We're not really sure what awaits us when we get to the future, but a destiny awaits an ultimate victor in the fights that we're seeing play out. I'm, of course, talking about March Madness. We're all watching it happen today. It's dramatic, it's intense. We don't know what destiny holds, but it's what we're experiencing right now.
Go UCLA Bruins.
Hey, so I don't know. Again, we probably have people across the spectrum listening today. Some are saying, "What's March Madness?" and others are saying, "Yeah, of course," because you can't help but watch something almost every night, whether that's the women's NCAA or men's NCAA or the NIT. It's an exciting time, but if you like basketball, which I do, and I'll, work with me on this. So, last night there was a real intense overtime session between Texas A&M and Iowa State on the women's NCAA. If anybody saw the game, you know what I'm talking about. Down to the last second, the ball was in the air and the clock ran out, and Texas A&M pulled that out. So I'm sorry for Iowa State fans. My personal favorite in the women's NCAA, Belmont, got eliminated yesterday. My daughter went to Belmont University, been a fan, so kind of sad about that. But if there was a team that might best capture what we're trying to do in space today, that might be one for you to look at if you don't already have a favorite or your favorite's been eliminated, might be the men's NCAA team of Loyola University. They're the kind of Cinderella story right now, right? And again, apologies to Illinois fans and Georgia Tech fans. Number one Illinois getting knocked off by Loyola last weekend. But why is Loyola so good? Or why are they doing so well in the tournament? And I think most of the commentators are saying it's not about star players. It's the teamwork they bring, particularly on defense, the nation's #1 ranked defensive team. And so if you're going to cheer for someone, if you watch a Loyola game this weekend, think about space. because we need to protect and defend and be the best at doing that as we can in space. I spoke last month in the wake of the Super Bowl and mentioned that, you know, we wanted to be in the spirit of Tom Brady. We wanted to be the greatest of all time in space. But Tom Brady makes it look easy. And it turns out space is hard. And so we're kind of facing the same challenges Loyola is, with challenges across the boards coming into their fight. And so when you think about March Madness and Loyola, think about space. We got our own space jam going on right now ourselves with the challenges we're facing as we're growing. All right, I'll work in a few basketball metaphors as we go forward here. So it's interesting right now. I'm honored to be in a position where I feel like I'm a member of two startups, or if you're an NCAA commentator, you call them upstarts. But they are Space Force and United States Space Command. And by the way, the American public and much of the media still confuses these two, right? There's talk about, oh, Space Force is moving its headquarters to Huntsville, or Space Command being confused for the actual organization that organizes, trains, and equips, which is Space Force. And so I think it's just good to remind everybody that that's going on. The more you can, I'm pretty sure every listener here today understands the difference. We have a combatant command called U.S. Space Command, like we have other combatant commands, like Chris introduced, the 11th Combatant Command in the United States Department of Defense. And we have a new service, the United States Space Force. But it's also an opportunity, these two organizations, as we move forward and as they start to grow. And I would say the alignment we now have regarding space organization with the United States Space Force as the service, organized, train, and equip organization for space capabilities, and United States Space Command responsible for the space AOR and operations in the domain, this alignment will serve the nation well. The organizations are differentiated, but together they are powerful. They're in alignment. We don't have anything like it elsewhere in the Department of Defense. We don't have a singular service and a singular combatant command focused on a singular domain, the way we have this nice binary alignment between organized, train, equip service and warfighter in the space domain. And so how our organizations grow together as two very young organizations right now, I think is something that will you'll see play out in the next in the months and years to come. So it'll be very important. The other thing I think I'll say from United States Space Command perspective is the Department of Defense writ large is looking, how do we do globally integrated operations? How do we employ the joint warfighting concept, which is meant to bring together all the domains and all of the combatant commands to be able to carry out a global and in a sense for U.S. Space Command, an exo-global set of operations, doing it together. How do we do it? The United States Space Command is interestingly positioned to really be a pace setter in this regard. Every other combatant command relies on space, and U.S. Space Command is going to rely on nearly every other combatant command to some extent. There will be a constantly moving, supported and supporting relationship between U.S. Space Command and those other commands at all times. Now, let's be clear. The lion's share of what U.S. Space Command is going to be doing is probably supporting and providing space capabilities to other combatant commands, to Indo-Pacific Command, to European Command in a large-scale engagement. But there will be needs for U.S. Space Command to be supported as well. If there's a threat in one of those terrestrial domains that's in the area of responsibility of one of those combatant commanders, then any action they take against that threat will be in support of General Dickinson's ability to maintain freedom of operation in the space domain. So it's going to be a team. It's a full court press, right? We're going to be doing a global operation covering the entire basketball arena all at once, doing it as team members. The other thing so I also want to talk through, so in pursuit of these kind of challenges looking at, General Dickinson released a strategic vision a couple months ago. I just want to walk through the 5 pieces of that. Probably many of the listeners have heard it already, but it's good to just kind of reinforce because it's driving what we're doing at U.S. Space Command each and every day. The first key task in that strategic vision is to know our adversary, understand our competition. When I was growing up as a young officer, as a spacecraft engineer and operator, really the enemy, if any, was probably the natural environment and or entropy, right? That's what made a satellite malfunction. Trying to operate out in space, something would go wrong, we try to fix it. It was not a thinking adversary that we were facing back then. That's not true anymore. Now, the first thing, when something goes wrong in space, the first thing we need to be thinking about, and the most important thing we need to be thinking about, is that it may be the work of a thinking adversary. We need to understand our competition. So that's a significant culture change for our space community that we have been undergoing for about a decade now, I would say, and that will continue. Second key task in General Dickinson's strategic vision is to build the command to compete and win. This is where I talk as being a startup. We are still getting our legs under us as a combatant command, getting the expertise, the resources, even the culture to do what we need to do. I am actually, I was there at the beginning back in early 2019. I was still working as the deputy to Air Force Space Command when that organization was still around. And saw as U.S. Space Command was standing up. And I think I would not have predicted then that we would really be so far along as a combatant command as we are today. I think the combatant command has come a long way. Working with the other combatant commands, working with the U.S. Space Force, with the other services. We have service components from all of the other services in addition to Space Force. We continue to grow. We've got a ways to go, but we are making great progress. The third key task is maintaining key relationships. And so, again, allies is a big part of this. The United States never gets into a conflict without allies. That will not be different in the space domain. We continue to strengthen those relationships, no matter whether they're close allies we've worked for a long time, and in many cases have members from nations such as the United Kingdom and Canada and Australia in our organizations, actually working as exchange officers, or working more closely with liaisons and ultimately maybe exchange members with other allies such as France, Germany, Japan, and more. And that will continue to grow. Fourth task in General Dickinson's in his strategic vision is to maintain digital superiority. A lot of you know that General Raymond, as the Chief of Space Operations in the Space Force, has talked about this a lot, making it a digital force. What do we mean? It means that we're going to leverage the cutting edge of digital technology across the spectrum where we can. If it's cyber defense, we need to have the very best tools that our technology sector has afforded us. If it's going to be the way that we use information, that we collect it, we store it, we make it discoverable, we analyze it, we use algorithms to exploit it. All of those kinds of capabilities that are cutting edge in our technology sector, we're going to need in U.S. Space Command. And so there's really nothing, I can't imagine a single cutting edge technology capability that doesn't have application to space. And so we start with that presumption and go from there. And then the fifth key task is to integrate commercial and interagency. I know we probably have a lot of commercial partners on listening today. I look forward to any of your questions. We want to work with you. How do we, as we move forward, as you have developing your business cases to perhaps potentially work with the government, how do we meet you on that? How do we make it and incentivize a partnership that works? One way that I think we fail is if we simply do how we've always done things with just a few industry partners, the usual ones. We need them. They are the bedrock of our capabilities, but we also need to be bringing in non-traditional industry partners to really leverage everything that our nation can bring to bear in that regard. And interagency. You will see, I think, as we progress, there will be more interaction between U.S. Space Command and the Department of Commerce, for example, as we look to evolve space traffic management. We'll also be doing the same with NASA, with the intelligence community. Our partnerships will continue to grow. They've been great, actually, ever since the command stood up, and those will continue to grow. So those are some focus areas for us. I think I'd like to just stop right there because I really want this to be interactive in a discussion and see what's on the minds of folks that are listening here today. And so, Chris, we'll turn it over to you for some Q&A. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your opening remarks, General Shaw. We appreciate it very much. And I'd like to pick up on a couple of the themes that you raised there. First question is, the command was established in August of 2019. How would you assess the relative maturity of the command at this point? As you look across the entire enterprise, what do you see as some of the major accomplishments, and what are items on the still to be accomplished list?
Yeah, so as I said, I think we've made far more progress than I expected. Some of the key things that we have been able to do is, I mentioned we were working well and integrating with our fellow combatant commands. So we have integrated planning elements. We have actually people in the other combatant commands wearing U.S. Space Command patches, working to integrate space into their plans and, if needed, other activities that they're conducting. I think we'll be teaming closely with U.S. Space Force as Space Force moves forward with a service component structure for the combatant commands. And together we'll work to really drive integration into combatant command operations across the globe in ways that we've never done before. I'd like to say that I think our partnership with the intelligence community has reached a new apogee. It kind of started, I think, back, I think it's always been there, but I think it hit a new level when we stood up what was then the JICSPOC, the Joint Interagency Combined Space Operations Center at Schriever Air Force Base back in 2015, then became the National Space Defense Center, which it is today, and that became that in 2017. And that was always founded on, hey, we need to have the intelligence community as a partner in that organization. And we needed to be able to grow not only foundational space intelligence, but operational space intelligence. We've made significant progress there, but it is also an important vector for us to continue today. I guess I think I would add commercial integration to that as well. We have more members than ever at the commercial integration cell out at Vandenberg Air Force Base that works within the Combined Space Operations Center. We have commercial partners. Many of them are probably here in the audience right now that have also been working with the National Space Defense Center, and I think we'll continue to. And U.S. Space Force has been doing the same thing on the Organized Train Equip side with their Space Enterprise Consortium to try to get non-traditional partners in. I think you'll see that there will be a Space Force will sponsor a SpaceWorks organization similar to AFWorks on the Air Force side. And so I'm kind of excited about all these opportunities that are growing as a broader ecosystem there that we'll be able to leverage with commercial partners. So that's just the beginning. I probably go on and on, Chris, but hopefully I helped answer the question there. We're making a lot of progress, a lot of fronts, and really proud of the command. I know General Dickinson is too.
That's great. Well, there is a lot to be proud of. Some have expressed frustration with the quote unquote overclassification of certain space systems and capabilities. For example, it would seem counterproductive to withhold information on sensitive capabilities from military planners and operators such as yourself, who may be called upon to employ such capabilities in crisis or wartime. At the same time, there's a natural tension between the desire to demonstrate capabilities in peacetime in order to bolster deterrence on the one hand, and withholding such systems as a potential war-winning capability in the event of conflict on the other hand. How do you go about balancing these competing interests? In a previous SpaceTime interview, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General John Hyten, said that a layered security architecture, like an onion skin, if you will, with multiple security layers of access categories and umbrella portfolios, is the best way to think about that challenge. How do you think about the issue of overclassification and reveal, conceal, et cetera?
I think I'm going to echo what you've heard General Hyten say. We've been talking about that. Even he and I have had discussions about that going back a number of years. So here's what we do to ourselves when it comes to overclassification. First, we bringing back NCAA March Madness, right? We box each other out. We're on the same team, and we kind of just block each other because we're not sharing information, and we're actually closing doors when we should be opening doors to facilitate communication. So that happens. The other thing is, because we have overclassification, we sometimes bring some capabilities to the game and to the planning too late. All right, to make them buzzer beaters when we should be scoring a lot sooner throughout the game. And so I think where we're going, and I think this is again what General Hyten was saying, is we need to stop treating everything that's special about space as a compartmented or as a classified topic in highly classified channels, and develop more of a structure where capability, we can talk about capabilities more openly, and then it's the actual technologies or capability sets, and it's the actual programs, I think, that we need to protect a little more. And there's a range, you know, in addition to the reasons I mentioned for why to do that, with regard to, you know, being able to work among our own Department of Defense a little bit better and to integrate it into planning and operations early and often. There's also a deterrence role to this. If it's hard to imagine a world where we would field, you know, SSBNs, submarines with submarine launched ballistic missiles on them, without saying that we have them, because they're part of our deterrence calculus. They're part of our bedrock of how we do strategic deterrence. At the same time, the undersea community is very protective of many of their technologies and capabilities at a lower level. We can do that same thing with regard to space. It isn't all or nothing. So I think we will definitely need to begin. I do think we're making some progress. I think we'll see some things happen here in the near future. I know that General Hyten's working it really hard at his level, but it is something. I guess we keep saying it's coming, but I think there's already been some change. You know, we used to be our space electronic warfare capabilities were highly protected kinds of programs, and it didn't make sense because one of our principles is that we really need to make space look like and act like other domains. We have electronic warfare in the terrestrial domains. We have space electronic warfare. It's a matter of physics, really. And so now that has changed, and I think other things will change too.
Sir, you mentioned the importance of having good intelligence to being able to deter and conduct operations. Can you talk a little bit about how NASIC and the command, the J2 staff, and the National Space Intelligence Center, soon to be formed, will work together to give you the intelligence picture that you need for I&W and OpIntel and the other critical needs you have to know what's going on in space and be able to shape it in ways that are beneficial to our national security?
Well, first of all, I think it's terrific. Space Force is now a recognized part of the intelligence community. I think they came out just a couple months ago. Again, that's a normalization effort. I think it was inevitable, but the fact that we're now, you know, that has now happened, I think is terrific. I was just talking with Leah Lauterbach, the S2 in the U.S. Space Force last week about, how do we continue to grow our organizations together? What does Space Force do? How does it interact with our intelligence substructure within U.S. Space Command? That's both at the headquarters level and down in our components. I think we have a really good team effort going right now. I would say that our focus now is on the operational intelligence piece. You know, our foundational intelligence is pretty good, and that's many of those folks that are at NASIC that provide the longer term analysis and idea of what we're looking at. We need to complement that with a robust operational intelligence capability.
Thank you. How mature is U.S. space warfare doctrine and training? What progress has been made in this area, and what additional actions are needed so the U.S. can effectively protect and defend critical assets in space? You know, where are we in the picture, so to speak? Or back to your basketball analogy, are we early in the first half, or are we down to the wire?
We're early. We're still working it. We're still getting our getting limbered up and getting warmed up, I think, and in a good way. So there was a remarkable step last year. The U.S. Space Force released its first Capstone Doctrine publication. I hope all of the members here have heard of that. If not, you should be able to find that pretty quickly on the internet. It's actually a pretty remarkable document to come out so quickly. I had a chance to look at a couple of drafts of it, and so did other senior leaders in the Space Force, but really wanted to get it out there, and it has some and it'll evolve. It's not perfect. It's going to evolve. So I think that's sort of a bedrock we're working from. I think, so this kind of goes back to, as Space Force and U.S. Space Command evolve, how do we work together on the space warfighting doctrine? The service will have its service doctrine, there's no doubt. There will be joint doctrine for space operations that incorporates the other services and perhaps the broader whole of government. That'll be more of a U.S. Space Command focus. Together, we put these things together in that unique alignment that I mentioned between U.S. Space Command and Space Force, and put that together. And the joint piece has to involve the other services as well. You know, I talked about this unique alignment because Space Force is going to deliver the lion's share, the huge amount of capability, that percentage of what Space Command is going to operate. And from a U.S. Space Command perspective, most of what U.S. Space Force feels and presents to the Joint Force is going to come to U.S. Space Command. But we also will be working with other services to make sure the doctrine we evolve is going to be able to deliver space capabilities to joint warfighters around the world, wherever they're needed. We continue to work it. I know that U.S. Space Force is going to is moving forward to stand up its Space Training and Readiness Command sometime in the days ahead. Part of that will involve a doctrine element to it, and I'm actually excited about what that ends up looking like and how we work with it from a U.S. Space Command perspective.
That's great. What particular foreign counterspace activities worry you the most? Is it rendezvous and proximity operations, laser illuminations, kinetic energy ASATs, cyber attacks, jamming? And are we adequately prepared today to handle this dizzying array of threats?
So the answer is yes, all of the above. I think I'll just say on that, Chris, that we're cognizant. Remember, the first key task in General Dickinson's strategic vision is to understand the competition. And so we are very focused on understanding that, anticipating where that's going, and finding ways to get the zone defense in play to deny any kind of threat that the adversary might employ.
And given our heavy reliance on space for vital military and economic functions, is it realistic to assume that Moscow and Beijing can be deterred from attacking U.S. national security space systems in a crisis or conflict? And how do we go about deterring them? More fundamental question is, first, can they be deterred? And if so, how do we deter them? And how can messaging and signaling and other aspects help contribute to that cause of deterring conflict in the first place?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question, but I think I would reword the question, or maybe I'd throw out an example. You asked if can Moscow or Beijing be deterred from attacking national security space assets. So if I ask the question, can Moscow or Beijing be deterred from attacking a drone flying off the South China Sea with regard to China, or deterred from perhaps even attacking a U.S. naval vessel in the South China Sea? Well, it depends on the geopolitics situation. It's going to be the same kind of question for all the domains. The second part of your question about how do we after it, we look at it from a whole of government and an all domain perspective. I don't think there's just deterrence in space alone that is detached from all of the other domains and all the other activities that are going on in the terrestrial spheres. It's all related. And so the best thing we can do is to synchronize and unify all of our activities in a multi-domain nature to provide the broadest deterrence messaging that we possibly can for the nation, for the Secretary of Defense, and for the combatant commander that needs it.
That's great. Thank you. A question from the audience is it possible for you to share the space-related IPL with industry so that industry can help invest in those technologies and capabilities that the command views as particularly important to its mission?
Yeah, so I think the actual IPA itself we can't share directly with industry. Maybe I can take that one back and see what we can do. I can tell you what some priorities are. The number one priority that General Dickinson has right now is space domain awareness. And we are, let me describe a little bit about that. For the longest time, we've been fortunate when space was a benign domain, we relied very strongly on Newton and Kepler to give us a good idea of what was happening in the space domain. What I mean by that is objects that were in orbit, they have this, it's almost magical, right? We have the ability to predict where they're going to be days, months, maybe even years ahead, because of just the nature of the law, physics of motion in the space domain. It's amazing, actually, that we can do that. The same way it's amazing that astronomers can predict where the planets are going to be a couple centuries from now in our solar system. It's the same kind of physics that's going on. The thing is, it's not a benign domain anymore, and that any potential adversary that we're going to deal with is not going to adhere to those nice, easily predictable behaviors and paths. And so we have to change our mindset on how we look at the space domain and how we achieve true space domain awareness in the face of potential threats. And so that mindset is what's got to change. And we still have a lot of people that are thinking in that old Newtonian Keplerian mindset. We got to think of more about a battle management mindset. And so what we're working on U.S. Space Command are some requirements in that regard that will shift the focus towards a more threat-based environment as opposed to a benign environment. And we need to do that. So I guess that, I would offer to industry there, that's kind of what we're thinking about. If there is some thinking, particularly in some of our commercial partners, on how the right way to use sensor data, the right predictive algorithms to now employ against that data, the right combination of data in order to predict and/or characterize behavior, we're very interested.
That's great. Thank you. We have a question from Teresa Hitchens. She asks, the Space Force just announced that it is sharing early use MCode receiver cards with allies. What is the significance of this? And is Space Command coordinating with or helping our allies figure out the best way to implement MCode onto their GPS receivers and operations?
So Teresa, appreciate you dialing in today. Thanks. That question is best for Space Force, but from a U.S. Space Command perspective, I'll say that we are, closely coordinate with Space Force and with our allies and partners. It will, that capability for our allies will give them more position navigation and timing resilience in their capabilities, which in turn will help the entire combined force in a potential future engagement in the terrestrial spheres. And that is all goodness.
That's great. A fundamental precept to military campaign planning is train like you fight. To what extent does the U.S. today train like we intend to fight or operate and protect critical U.S. space systems? How effective is our training regimen today?
So we are making steps to, so I might point best to this, again, the United States Space Force, our service that's doing, that organized, trains, and equips our capabilities in the Space Training and Readiness Command that they're focused on standing up sometime in the days ahead. That will be focused on exactly that kind of activity. From a U.S. Space Command perspective, we will definitely be interested and integrated as we look at how do we think a potential space campaign plays out in the future. What are the capabilities we will need? What are the actions that we would take and when? I think it's yet another example of where a nice alignment with the service and the combatant command are going to serve us well.
Fantastic. Here's a question from the audience. Space Command's early warning capability is repeatedly highlighted as an important and effective mission the command provides, something we saw with the effective advance warning of Iran's attack last January on Al-Assad Air Base. To the extent possible, can you describe the role that the command served yesterday in tracking North Korea's recently, I should say, in tracking North Korea's ballistic missile test?
So I won't talk about specific operations, but what I can say is it is absolutely true that when some of these threats emerge, the first opportunity to detect them is going to be from space. And it is a responsibility of U.S. Space Command to make sure that information flows as quickly as it can to whatever warfighter needs it. And that's our job. And so you'd asked me earlier, Chris, what keeps me up at night? What am I concerned about? One thing I am concerned about is that somehow we don't deliver on that need and we let a warfighter down somewhere. I'm also fond of saying that in the all-domain fight, space cannot lag the other domains. It has to lead the other domains. All the more reason that I think U.S. Space Command plays a pace-setting role in globally integrated operations. And what you pointed out in this example is exactly why. The first indication that something might be happening might be very well may be a space capability that detects it. And so we have to, and then we have to immediately turn around and get that to whoever needs it in the other domains. And so again, that's a responsibility we have. Space cannot lag the other domains.
Well, and in particular, just to follow on that, how about JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control? Where does Space Command fit into that, and where does space more broadly fit into leveraging JADC2, which today is to me seems more of a concept than a capability? But tell us a little bit more about your take on JADC2 and the command's role in JADC2.
Yeah, so two things on that real quick, and I've said a couple of these before, just so some members of your audience may have heard me say it. So the first is, you know, in its most basic essence, JADC2 is about making sure that all operations and all domains can rapidly share information with one another and be part of some sort of common picture. We typically have not done a very good job of that. There are many instances of where we've had certain weapon systems that can't talk to other weapon systems, or they can't both link into the same common operational picture and have an understanding of what's going on. You know, that's 20th century kind of warfare. We can't do that in the 21st century. It's all got to work together. The second thing I like to say is JADC2 often, and rightfully so, is usually focused on a terrestrial domain or a terrestrial fight and bringing things into that fight. And again, that is the likely to be the primary focus in any future fight. But space needs to have the all-domain integration too, to support General Dickinson's operations within the space area of responsibility. And, you know, some examples there are, if there is a space electronic warfare jammer on a maritime vessel, an adversary maritime vessel somewhere that is affecting the space domain, General Dickinson needs to know about it. If there is a mobile ground directed energy weapon somewhere that might represent a threat, General Dickinson needs to know about it, and so do our operational commanders. If there is an aircraft capable of launching an air-launched anti-satellite weapon operating in the air domain, we need to know about it. And so I just mentioned that for the audience to realize everybody needs to be, everyone is all part of JADC2 in all domains.
Understand. We have a question from the audience. 2 satellites have broken apart in the past week or so. Do debris from either the Yunhai satellite or the NOAA satellite pose a risk to SpaceCom operations? And if so, how are you responding to that problem? And have you determined what happened to the Chinese satellite?
So we're tracking the 2 incidents. Let me say that when it comes to debris mitigation, the best thing that I think we all can do moving forward, any spacefaring actor, is to do our best to create satellites that aren't going to do that sort of thing at end of life. Right? This has been happening since the dawn of the space age, where satellites at end of life, for whatever reason, the pressure remaining in a propellant tank causes it to rupture over time, or batteries that are near the end of their life come apart. And this, every spacefaring actor has had to deal with this, these kinds of breakups. We need to design satellites that are better safed when they reach the end of their lives.
Various friends and allies of the United States have expressed interest in acquiring advanced national security space capabilities. And this builds on your earlier comments about the important role our allies play. For example, the Japanese seek to acquire space situational awareness and missile early warning systems. The United Kingdom seeks to acquire communications and PNT constellations. And the Australians seek to field communications and intelligence capabilities. Is the U.S. working with these allies as a force multiplier, encouraging them to field complementary capabilities? Or how do we view the role of the allies, of our friends and allies in this regard? And what's the role of the command in promoting those relationships?
Okay, that's kind of a layup type question. The answer is, I think the answer is yes to all the things that were said there. Yes, of course we'll work with our allies to see what kind of capabilities they need and how we might work together in a potential operation. So there's anything that ranges from the capability development that I think Space Force is probably working with their counterparts to how we would integrate that into an operational framework, which is going to be primarily U.S. Space Command. So again, we teamed together on that, and we're of course any nation, any allied nation that's going to want to develop a space capability, we're naturally interested and excited about.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. What leader or office is on point to advocate for broader international collaboration, especially beyond Five Eyes, to include other close allies and emerging allies such as India? And he goes on to say, a similar question applies to emerging commercial companies. Who are the advocates empowered to push the command and the Space Force beyond the existing relationships?
Well, I think if I understand the question correctly, the answer is it's a team effort. You know, U.S. Space Force is going to have some relationships typical that any service would normally have with other nations. You know, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, they have relationships with their counterpart navies and air forces and armies in the world. Often it's for either foreign military sales or training or just you know, capability development or partnering. At the same time, United States Space Command will, since it's responsible for the space AOR and our allies, you know, have activities in that AOR, we will work with them on more of an operational focus. And in ways similar, the first question, the question right before this asked about, you know, as they develop their capabilities, entering into an operational framework. So I think it's not any one player. It's going to be a team effort and how we do that. If you're looking, if the question was more specific about who's focused on that in each organization, I think it will vary. Usually it's an S5 function in the United States Space Force, and it'd be normally a J5 function within the U.S. Space Command. But again, team effort. So there's no one singular answer to that question.
And we have another question from the audience. As someone now in commercial space, I'm amazed at the speed of motion for the space economy. As the space ecosystem matures, having more robust coordination of civil, national security, and commercial space is important to leverage investment and technology advancement across all three. In addition to AFWorks, SpaceWorks, and DIU, do you see any other avenues to increase robustness of this coordination?
You know, I think I'll do a give and go on that one and say, I'd really like to know what industry thinks beyond AFWorks, SpaceWorks, and DIUX, and the spec OTA that SMC has and our integration cells that we have at U.S. Space Command. You know, that's the beginning of a pretty good ecosystem I think we've laid out, but I would definitely agree that probably could grow. So again, kind of back, I'm going to throw the question back out. I'm interested to see what industry thinks about that. Don't know if we can't really have a discussion in this forum, so maybe that's one for a later day, but I'm definitely interested.
That sounds great. We have a question saying the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has recently commented on the Russia-U.S. consultations on space security that were held just a few days ago. How do you assess the status of the bilateral dialogue and cooperation on space security between the U.S. and Russia, or more broadly with China and others at this stage?
Yeah, I'll just say that our current administration is still working out how it wants to approach those particular dialogues, and I'll leave it at that.
That's fine. Another topic you touched on in your opening remarks, Space Policy Directive 4 called for closer integration between DoD and the intelligence community on a broad range of national security space matters. Can you go into a little more detail on those, the cooperation between the DoD and the IC, and where do you see that cooperation heading it over time?
Yeah, Chris, you know, I think I probably, what I said earlier is where I would just repeat here. We have had a good partnership with the intelligence community going forward. We will continue that. It has to be both foundational operational intelligence, and I'm pretty optimistic about where we're headed.
That's great. Thank you. You also mentioned the coordination, collaboration between the different commands and the IPEs, for example, in different commands. What do you think we should hope for and seek from those relationships? How does cross-command collaboration improve the overall product, if you will? And where do you see that going? And the command, how interested is the command in doing that, seeing that? And you mentioned some of the IPEs, for example. Are there other examples you could cite of how that cross-command collaboration plays out in practice?
So I think we are, we are further along today than we've ever been in terms of integrating space capabilities into the terrestrial spheres. So let me step back, right? How long have joint warfighters depended on space capabilities? Well, kind of starts at the beginning, but I think it really ramps up probably in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And by the way, it's been on an accelerating curve ever since. Our joint force relies on space today more than it ever has, and that curve continues to go up. And so that's a tremendous responsibility we have. So what the IP, what total integration really needs to do is to make sure that those space capabilities are getting to the joint warfighter that needs them as quickly as possible. And in a degraded environment, we are adapting to that to continue to fight through and deliver those capabilities. The only way that I think that gets done is with really tight integration and understanding of what, for example, a combatant command, a terrestrial combatant command scheme and maneuver may be, and how we can best support that. And the way you do that is you have people there working right with them. And I think that we'll see in the future, it's going to be a combination of space forces, U.S. Space Force, potentially with a service component and combatant commands, as well as a U.S. Space Command integration mechanism working together to really get at that. Together, that construct, again, I'll go back to, I think U.S. Space Command is a pace-setting combatant command for globally integrated operations. No matter where you are in the spectrum of conflict, from special operations to what strategic command has to do with every day, and no matter where you are in maybe a temporal dimension of operations, from a competition phase we're in today to crisis to beyond, space needs to be there. So as General Dickens is fond of saying, never a day without space, and in any of those situations, we never want to have a day without space.
Absolutely. Sir, you're a distinguished graduate of the Air Force Academy. I should mention to you that the association has recently launched a major initiative, a workforce development initiative, working with various universities and other activities, working very closely with the Space Force S1 organization, Pat Mulcahy and various others, General D.T. Thompson, your colleague. Where would you say is the Academy today in terms of helping to educate the next generation of space leaders? And what direction would you like to see that go, both at the Academy and more broadly through academia?
Yeah, so let me just kind of step back from my U.S. Space Command role and just talk about, you're right, as an Academy graduate and as a member of the United States Space Force, I think we're on a terrific trajectory with the Air Force Academy right now. You'll have to go to Space Force for the exact numbers, but I think that the number of graduates we expect to come out here in a couple months from the Air Force Academy that will enter the Space Force is going to be at a new apogee. I mean, it continues to grow. I think that's terrific. General Clark has been a big champion of integrating space into the Academy's activities there. I don't see that slowing down. Of course, the Academy has a great tradition of doing some terrific space activities with FalconSat and their astronautics lab that they have there. And so I think I like the trajectory that we're headed on. If there may be some of the audience might be asking, so when do you get your separate Space Force Academy? I don't think we're going to need one anytime soon. I think the way that the United States Air Force Academy is organizing now to produce officers for both services is exactly the path that we need to be on.
You talked about the command's space intelligence posture. Does the command have the internal resources, both personnel and funding, it needs to stay ahead of growing foreign space threats? There's whether it was the command or the force, the general political agreement was that both organizations would be lean, quote unquote. And the question is, there's obviously a thin line between being lean and being not having enough resources to adequately perform the mission you've been assigned. So where are you in that issue, both as it relates to the intelligence function and more broadly across the command? Do you have the resources you need? And what can those of us who are strong advocates of the space mission, national security space mission, and the work of the command do to help bolster the case for ensuring that adequate resources are provided in the future?
Yeah, Chris, I think, we've talked a bit about Intel already. I think in this forum, I'll just say, I think the path we're on is a good one. It isn't always about the number of human bodies you have in an organization. It's about a lot more than that, and especially with where technology vectors are taking us. So I think we're on a good path, both with the human capital as well as the capability sets we're developing.
And sir, one last question before we let you have some wrap-up comments here, and we deeply appreciate your time with us today. We have a question from the audience. Can you talk about areas of support you still rely on U.S. Strategic Command to assist you, and how that relationship is going? What tentacles still exist to Omaha, and what support are they providing, and how does that evolve over time?
Well, so first, we still have some terrific space professionals that are still in Omaha that are part of U.S. Space Command. So we actually have a geographically dislocated piece of U.S. Space Command's headquarters. Those are mostly civilian professionals that are part of U.S. Space Command. So there's a realization that that's the case. So the second is, we will always have tentacles with the United States Strategic Command, the same way we do with other combatant commands, and what I've described here in my talk today. There's a very direct linkage between space capabilities and what Strategic Command needs for warning, for communications, and a lot of others. So we will always have that linkage.
And I will violate my previous comment, obey that order. In a potentially flat budget year, are you confident that the space architecture for national security space systems is funded at an adequate level? If not, where do we need to make greater investments? Question from the audience.
Yeah, so the short shot clock beating answer to that is that's really a good question for Space Force. They're the ones working the budget. The budget is still work. What U.S. Space Command will do is work closely with Space Force to make sure that whatever resources are there are prioritized properly against warfighter needs.
Understand. And sir, the floor is yours to make any closing remarks you care to make. And thank you again for your time today. We greatly appreciate it. And let us know how the association and others can assist in the work of the command. I
think I'd like to say, hey, again, thanks to NSSA for hosting this forum, and again, thanks for remembering General Moorman. And I'll say to everybody there, I can't wait till we can actually have these in person. We can have some in-person kinds of discussions and get after it. But this has been, I think, a helpful forum. I hope that my answers to your questions were not air balls. That we at the end of the day, we take the March Madness to another level. But thanks. Great to be part of this forum today, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, sir. I didn't detect any, I didn't hear any yells, screams from the audience of air balls. So well done, sir. Keep up the great work, and onward and upward to you and your team.
Okay, thanks out here.
Thank you very much for your participation today to our audience, and look forward to seeing you at the next SpaceTime interview series. Take care.